The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1882, drawing the curious stares of townspeople who knew better than to interfere with Quinn Hawkins. The untamed cowboy stood in the middle of Willow Creek's only street, his smoking Colt revolver pointed skyward as the man who challenged him trembled in the dirt. "Next time you accuse a man of cheating, make damn sure you can back it up with more than whiskey courage," Quinn said, his voice carrying on the wind like a warning. He holstered his weapon with practiced ease, the leather of his gun belt worn and weathered like the man himself. At 32, Quinn had earned every scar that marked his sun-bronzed skin. His reputation spread across 3 territories as a man who answered to no one, not to sheriffs, not to cattle barons, and certainly not to women. The locals called him Untamable, a force of nature like the wild mustangs that roamed the high country. Some said he'd killed a dozen men, others claimed he'd stolen cattle across the border, but all agreed on one thing: Quinn Hawkins belonged to the open range and nothing else. Ruby O'Malley watched the confrontation from the covered porch of her father's general store, her green eyes narrowed against the afternoon sun. At 26, she was considered a spinster by most, but that suited her fine. Independence ran in her blood as surely as the Irish heritage that gave her that flame-red hair. "That man's going to get himself killed one of these days," her father, Patrick O'Malley, muttered beside her. "Or worse, he'll kill someone who matters to this town." "He only draws on men who deserve it," Ruby replied, surprising herself with the swift defense. Her father shot her a concerned glance. "Stay clear of that one, Ruby. Men like Hawkins don't settle, don't change. They ride in with the wind and leave just as quick." Ruby nodded absently, but her gaze remained fixed on Quinn as he strode toward the saloon, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon light. Something about his solitary figure stirred something in her, not pity, but recognition. Like her, he stood apart from others, though for very different reasons. Inside the Willow Creek saloon, Quinn ordered whiskey and carried it to a corner table, his back to the wall as always. The patrons gave him wide berth, conversation dimming at his entrance before resuming in more hushed tones. He was used to this treatment, preferred it even. Solitude was safer than friendship, and wariness from others meant no expectations to fulfill. "Mr. Hawkins," Sheriff Morton said, approaching with the cautious respect he'd developed over the 3 months Quinn had been in Willow Creek. "That was unnecessary business out there." "Man called me a cheat and pulled first," Quinn replied, not bothering to look up from his drink. "I shot the sky, not him." "One of these days, your aim might drift lower," the sheriff warned. "I run a peaceful town here." Quinn finally raised his eyes, the color of a winter storm. "Then perhaps your townspeople should be more careful with their accusations." The sheriff sighed. "Your reputation rides ahead of you, Hawkins. Most men wouldn't dare cross you." "Most men have sense," Quinn replied, ending the conversation by returning his attention to his whiskey. The next morning found Ruby riding out at dawn to deliver supplies to the Whitaker homestead, 5 miles outside of town. Her buckskin mare moved at a steady pace through the sage-dotted landscape, the morning air still cool from the night. Ruby enjoyed these solitary rides, the brief escape from the confines of town life, and the questioning looks of those who wondered why Patrick O'Malley's daughter hadn't married. The truth was simpler than most imagined. Ruby had refused 3 proposals from respectable men because none stirred her heart. Her mother, before passing from fever 5 years earlier, had warned her against settling for companionship without passion. "Life is too long to spend it with someone who doesn't make your heart race," Catherine O'Malley had whispered in her final days. Ruby had taken those words to heart, perhaps too literally. As she rounded a bend in the trail, Ruby spotted a horse and rider ahead, the unmistakable figure of Quinn Hawkins astride his midnight black stallion. He appeared to be studying the horizon, unaware of her approach. Ruby slowed her mare, debating whether to announce her presence or turn back. Curiosity won. "Good morning, Mr. Hawkins," she called when she was 20 yards away. Quinn turned sharply, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster before recognizing her. "Miss O'Malley," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You're riding alone." It wasn't a question, but Ruby answered anyway. "I deliver supplies to outlying homesteads once a week. Been doing it for years without trouble." "There's always a first time for trouble," he said, eyes scanning the surrounding terrain as if expecting danger to materialize. "Are you warning me or threatening me, Mr. Hawkins?" Ruby asked, a challenge in her voice. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Neither. Just an observation from someone who's seen his share of trouble." "And caused your share too, from what I hear," Ruby replied, immediately regretting her boldness. Instead of anger, Quinn looked amused. Reputations tend to grow taller tales than men. Ruby studied him, the lean, muscled frame, the watchful eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, the weathered face that revealed little. "Is yours undeserved, then?" "I didn't say that." Quinn adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Some parts might be exaggerated, others understated. Depends who's doing the telling. And if you were doing the telling." Quinn's expression closed like a shuttered window. "I don't make a habit of explaining myself, Miss O'Malley." Ruby felt the rebuke, but pushed forward. "Everyone in town wonders what brought you to Willow Creek. 3 months is longer than most drifters stay." "Perhaps I'm not most drifters." His tone had cooled considerably. Ruby nodded, accepting the boundary he'd drawn. "Well, I should continue my deliveries. Good day, Mr. Hawkins." As she urged her mare forward, Quinn surprised her by speaking again. "There's a group of riders been spotted north of here. 3 men, well armed, asking questions about homesteaders. Might be nothing, but you'd be wise to stay alert." Ruby turned back. "You're warning me." "Just an observation," he repeated, though his eyes conveyed more concern than his words. "Thank you for the observation, then." Ruby tipped her head slightly before continuing on her way, feeling his gaze follow her until the trail curved out of sight. Quinn watched her go, troubled by the encounter in ways he couldn't articulate. Ruby O'Malley wasn't like other women he'd met in frontier towns. There was a directness to her, an independence that commanded respect. And something else that bothered him more. She'd looked at him without fear or disgust, only curiosity. He'd been in Willow Creek too long already. 3 months in one place was dangerous enough time for people to start recognizing patterns, asking questions. Enough time for the past to catch up. Quinn had decided that morning to move on. Perhaps head north to Montana Territory, where the spaces between towns stretched even wider. Now, watching Ruby's figure disappear around the bend, he found himself hesitating. Those riders he'd mentioned weren't imaginary. He'd tracked them for 2 days, recognizing the methodical way they surveyed homesteads. They had the look of hired guns, though for whom and why remained unclear. Quinn turned his stallion toward town. One more day wouldn't matter. He'd make sure the sheriff was aware of the strangers, though Morton struck him as more politician than lawman. Then he'd gather his few belongings and ride out before sunset. By noon, Ruby had completed her deliveries and was returning to town when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from behind. Turning in her saddle, she saw a rider pushing his horse hard, dust billowing behind him. She recognized young Teddy Whitaker, the 15-year-old son of the family she'd visited earlier. "Miss Ruby!" he called, his voice breaking with panic. "Men came, 3 of them. Pa's shot bad." Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where's your mother and sister?" "Hiding in the root cellar. Ma sent me for the doctor." Tears streaked the boy's dust-covered face. "They said they wanted our land, that we had no right to it. When Pa refused to sign some paper, they shot him." "Ride to town, Teddy. Get Dr. Fletcher and tell Sheriff Morton what happened," Ruby instructed, already turning her mare around. "Where are you going?" the boy called. "Back to help your mother. Now go!" Ruby pushed her buckskin hard, fear clutching at her throat. The Whitakers were good people. Hard-working homesteaders who'd built their small ranch from nothing over the past 5 years. Their land bordered the massive holdings of the Silverhorn Ranch, owned by Victor Silverhorn, the territory's wealthiest cattle baron, who'd been buying or forcing out smaller ranchers for years. She was within a mile of the Whitaker place when a rifle shot cracked through the air, kicking up dirt just yards ahead of her horse. The buckskin reared in panic, nearly throwing Ruby before she regained control. "That's far enough, lady," a man's voice called from a stand of cottonwoods to her right. Ruby's blood ran cold as 3 riders emerged, rifles trained on her. The leader, a lean man with a pockmarked face, grinned unpleasantly. "Well now, what have we here? Another concerned neighbor?" His mocking tone made Ruby's skin crawl. "I'm just passing through," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That's a lie," said another rider, younger with cold eyes. "Saw her at the homestead earlier today." The leader edged his horse closer. "Seems like you've put yourself in a bad situation, miss. We've got business that doesn't concern you." "Shooting an unarmed man concerns everyone in this territory," Ruby replied, anger overcoming fear. "The sheriff's already been notified." The men exchanged glances. "That backwater badge won't reach here for hours," the leader said. "By then, we'll be long gone, and you with us, I'm thinking. Silverhorn might appreciate a hostage if things get complicated." Ruby's mind raced. She carried no weapon, and even if she turned her horse now, she couldn't outrun 3 riders. As the men moved to surround her, a single gunshot rang out from the ridge above, punching through the leader's hat. "Next one goes lower," came Quinn Hawkins' voice, calm and deadly. The 3 riders scattered for cover, guns swinging toward the ridge where Quinn sat on his black stallion, rifle aimed with unwavering precision. "Hawkins!" the leader spat. "This isn't your fight." "It is now," Quinn replied. "Miss O'Malley, ride to me, slowly." Ruby urged her nervous mare toward the slope, expecting bullets to follow. None came. The hired guns seemed to recognize something in Quinn that gave them pause. "Silverhorn won't like this interference," the leader called. "Silverhorn doesn't own this territory," Quinn answered, "and he doesn't pay me." When Ruby reached him, Quinn kept his rifle trained on the men below. "Ride over the ridge and wait for me," he instructed quietly. "I need to help the Whitakers," she protested. "You can't help them dead." His eyes never left the gunman. "Go. Now." Ruby hesitated only a moment before complying. As she crested the ridge, she heard Quinn's voice carry on the wind. "You boys have a choice. Ride back to Silverhorn and tell him his methods have been noticed, or see which of you I drop first." There was a tense silence, then the sound of horses moving away. Minutes later, Quinn appeared over the ridge, his expression grim. "They're gone for now," he said, "but they'll be back with more men." "We need to help the Whitakers," Ruby insisted. Quinn nodded. "I followed their boy into town. Sheriff's gathered a posse, and the doctor's riding out. We'll go around to approach from the west, in case those men circle back." As they rode, Ruby asked, "How did you know I'd be in trouble?" "I didn't," Quinn admitted. "But I know Silverhorn's methods. When I saw the boy racing to town, I figured his men had made their move. I was tracking them when I spotted you." "Why involve yourself at all?" Ruby pressed. "Everyone says you keep to yourself." Quinn was quiet for so long, Ruby thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Some lines shouldn't be crossed. Shooting a man on his own land, threatening his family, those are lines." They reached the Whitaker homestead to find Dr. Fletcher already tending to Samuel Whitaker on the kitchen table. The man's wife Martha stood nearby, white-faced but steady, while their daughter Emma, barely 12, clung to her skirts. "He'll live," the doctor announced as they entered. "Bullet went clean through his shoulder. He's lost blood, but should recover with rest." Martha Whitaker looked up, relief washing over her face at the sight of Ruby. When she noticed Quinn, however, wariness replaced relief. "Mr. Hawkins," she acknowledged with a nod. "Madam," Quinn replied, removing his hat. "Sheriff's riding in with some men. Should be here soon." "Thank God," Martha breathed, "and thank you both for coming. Those men, they said they'd return with papers for me to sign. Said without Samuel, I'd have no choice." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Silverhorn's pushing too far this time." "It's been building for months," Martha explained. "First offers to buy, then warnings about water rights, then threats about our cattle straying onto his land, which they never did." Ruby took Martha's work-worn hand in her own. "You won't face this alone. Sheriff Morton arrived with 5 townsmen, including Ruby's father, who rushed to embrace his daughter. When young Teddy came tearing into town with his story, and then you weren't at the store," Patrick's voice broke. "Thank God you're safe." Quinn stood apart from the others, his tall frame filling the doorway as he kept watch outside. The sheriff approached him cautiously. "Hawkins, the boy says you drove off Silverhorn's men." "For now," Quinn replied. "They'll be back, with more guns." Morton frowned. "This is a matter for the law to handle." "Then handle it," Quinn said flatly. "But Silverhorn's been buying judges and officials across the territory. Can you stand against him if he claims legal right to this land?" The sheriff had no answer for that. As the men discussed plans for guarding the homestead, Ruby joined Quinn by the door. "You're staying to help?" Quinn's eyes remained on the distant horizon. "Until the immediate danger passes." "That's not what people expect from the untamable Quinn Hawkins," Ruby said softly. "Perhaps people don't know me as well as they think," he replied, finally meeting her gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, an understanding that ran deeper than words. Ruby saw beneath the hardened exterior to the man who'd risked himself for strangers, who'd followed his own code when it would have been easier to ride away. "Perhaps they don't," she agreed. Over the next 3 days, the Whitaker homestead became an armed camp. Men from town took turns standing guard, and Samuel gradually regained strength. Quinn remained constant, sleeping little, watching the approaches to the property with the vigilance of a man accustomed to danger. Ruby stayed to help Martha with the household and tending to Samuel. On the evening of the 3rd day, she found Quinn sitting on the porch steps, cleaning his rifle in the fading light. "You should get some rest," she said, settling beside him. "You've barely slept." "I'll sleep when this is finished," he replied, hands moving with practiced efficiency over the weapon. "And when will that be?" Ruby asked. "Silverhorn isn't a man who gives up easily." Quinn reassembled the rifle with a series of metallic clicks. "No, he isn't, but neither am I." "Why does this matter so much to you?" Ruby asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Most hired guns would side with Silverhorn, the money's better." Quinn was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her. "My family had a small ranch in Texas when I was a boy. Man like Silverhorn wanted our water rights. When my father refused to sell, men came one night." He paused. "I was 15 out hunting, came back to find the house burned, my parents and young sister inside." Ruby's hand covered her mouth. "Quinn, I'm so sorry." "The law did nothing. The man who took our land had too much influence." His voice remained steady, but Ruby saw the pain etched in the lines of his face. "So I learned to use a gun, track down each man who was there that night." "You killed them," Ruby said softly. It wasn't a question. "One by one, over 5 years." Quinn's eyes met hers, challenging her to judge him. "The last was the man who gave the orders. After that, I kept moving. Easier that way. Safer." Ruby absorbed his confession, understanding now the demons that drove him. "Is that why you help people like the Whitakers? To make amends for what happened to your family?" "Nothing makes amends for that," he said sharply, then softened. "But yes, perhaps. Or maybe I just recognize evil when I see it." Ruby touched his arm gently. "What you're doing here, it matters. To the Whitakers, to the town, to me." Quinn looked at her hand on his arm, then into her eyes. For a moment, the hardness in his gaze softened, and Ruby glimpsed the man he might have been without the tragedy that shaped him. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Quinn was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. "It's the sheriff," he said after a moment, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Sheriff Morton dismounted wearily, nodding to Quinn and Ruby. "Thought you should know Judge Parker arrived from the territorial court. Silverhorn's filed legal papers claiming the Whitaker land based on some old Spanish land grant he supposedly purchased." "That's ridiculous," Ruby protested. "The Whitakers have proper homestead papers." "Which is why the judge wants to see all documentation tomorrow in town." Morton looked troubled. "He's ordered a halt to any aggressive actions until then." Quinn's expression darkened. "Convenient timing. Is this judge on Silverhorn's payroll?" "Parker has a reputation for fairness," Morton replied defensively. "But Silverhorn has lawyers from Denver. It's going to come down to the paperwork." After the sheriff left, Quinn paced the porch like a caged mountain lion. "This is a delay tactic," he muttered. "Silverhorn's gathering more men while hiding behind legal proceedings." Ruby shared his concern. "The Whitakers' documents are in order, but if the judge can be influenced, we need to be prepared for either outcome," Quinn said. "If the ruling goes against the Whitakers, Silverhorn's men will move immediately." The following morning, Samuel Whitaker insisted on attending the hearing, despite his injury. "It's my land and my family," he told Quinn when the cowboy suggested he stay behind. "I'll face this standing or not at all." The town of Willow Creek buzzed with tension as residents lined the street outside the makeshift courthouse in the town hall. Victor Silverhorn had arrived with 6 armed men and 2 suited lawyers from Denver, their expensive clothes and confident manner intimidating in the frontier town. Silverhorn himself cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man accustomed to power. His cold eyes surveyed the crowd with disdain, before settling on Quinn with narrowed recognition. Inside, Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with wire-rimmed spectacles, called the proceedings to order. The small room was packed with observers, including Ruby and her father. Quinn stood at the back, near the door, his posture alert. Silverhorn's lawyers presented first, unrolling yellowed documents with elaborate Spanish script and official-looking seals. They spoke of historical precedent, territorial rights that predated American governance, and the legitimate purchase of these claims by their client. Samuel Whitaker, pale but determined, presented his homestead grant, signed by territorial officials and properly registered. Martha testified about the improvements they'd made to previously unclaimed land, the house they'd built with their own hands, the wells they'd dug, the crops they'd planted. Judge Parker examined all documents carefully before addressing the room. This court finds the matter complex, but not without precedent. The Homestead Act grants rights to settlers on unclaimed federal lands. The question before us is whether this land was truly unclaimed when granted to the Whitaker family. Ruby felt her heart sink as the judge continued. Mr. Silverhorn's Spanish land grant appears authentic, though such grants have been subject to dispute following the Mexican-American War. However, he raised a finger. I must note that for such a grant to remain valid, the holder must register it with territorial authorities within 1 year of establishment of territorial governance. The judge peered at Silverhorn over his spectacles. I see no evidence that your predecessors, or you upon purchase of this claim, ever registered this grant with territorial authorities. Therefore, at the time the Whitaker family received their homestead rights, the land was indeed unclaimed in the eyes of the law. A murmur ran through the crowded room. Silverhorn's face darkened as the judge concluded, "This court finds in favor of the Whitaker family. Their homestead claim stands as valid and enforceable." Furthermore, he raised his voice over the growing noise. "This court orders Mr. Silverhorn and his representatives to cease all intimidation and interference with the Whitaker property and family forthwith." Cheers erupted from the townspeople while Silverhorn conferred furiously with his lawyers. Quinn remained watchful, his hand never straying far from his holstered revolver. As the Whitakers accepted congratulations outside, Silverhorn approached with his men. The street went quiet as the cattle baron stopped before Samuel. "This isn't over, Whitaker," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Courts can make mistakes, papers can be lost, accidents can happen." Quinn stepped forward, positioning himself between Silverhorn and the homesteader. "Threats against a man and his family after a court ruling could be considered contempt," he said evenly. "Or worse." Silverhorn's cold eyes assessed Quinn. "Hawkins, your reputation precedes you, a hired gun with principles how novel." "I'm not hired by anyone," Quinn replied, "just a concerned citizen supporting the law." "Law?" Silverhorn scoffed. "Out here, law is whatever the strongest man says it is." "Then perhaps you're not as strong as you believe," Quinn countered. The tension in the street was palpable as the two men faced off. Sheriff Morton pushed through the crowd. "That's enough. The judge has ruled, Silverhorn. I suggest you and your men leave town peacefully." Silverhorn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Sheriff. We respect the law." He turned to leave, but paused beside Quinn. "This territory isn't big enough for men who can't be bought, Hawkins. Remember that." As Silverhorn and his men rode out of town, the crowd dispersed, relief mixing with lingering unease. Ruby approached Quinn, who watched the departing riders with a troubled expression. "It's not over, is it?" she asked quietly. "No," Quinn answered. "Men like Silverhorn don't accept defeat. He'll try another approach." "The Whitakers can't live under constant threat," Ruby said. "Someone needs to stand with them." Quinn looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I was planning to leave Willow Creek. And now?" He shook his head slightly. "Now, I don't know." That evening, the town held an impromptu celebration at the saloon. The Whitakers were the guests of honor. with townspeople buying rounds and pledging support against any future trouble from Silverhorn, Quinn observed from his usual corner table, nursing a whiskey separate from the festivities. Ruby made her way through the crowd to join him. "You should be celebrating too," she said, sitting across from him uninvited. "You helped make this happen." "A judge who couldn't be bought made it happen," Quinn corrected. "I just kept Silverhorn's men from forcing the issue before the hearing." "You stayed when you could have ridden away," Ruby insisted. "That counts for something." Quinn studied her for a moment. "Why do you keep seeking me out, Miss O'Malley? Most people in town still give me a wide berth." "Most people are fools," Ruby replied, with a directness that brought a ghost of a smile to Quinn's lips. "They see what they expect to see. I prefer to make my own judgments." "And what judgment have you made about me?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. Ruby met his gaze steadily. "That you're a good man who's done some bad things. That you fight for what's right when it would be easier not to. That you're lonely, but won't admit it, even to yourself." Quinn's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something more vulnerable before his guard returned. "You see a lot for someone who barely knows me." "Perhaps I'd like to know you better," Ruby said softly. Before Quinn could respond, a commotion at the saloon entrance drew their attention. Sheriff Morton burst in, his face grim. "Silverhorn's ranch is burning," he announced to the stunned room. His foreman rode in saying raiders hit an hour ago. 2 ranch hands dead. The celebration dissolved into concerned murmurs as Morton continued. "Silverhorn's blaming the Whitakers and everyone who supported them. He's gathering men to ride here at first light." Quinn was on his feet immediately. "He's using this as an excuse to attack the town." "But we had nothing to do with any raid," Samuel Whitaker protested. "Doesn't matter," Quinn said. "He'll claim you did, use it as justification for whatever he was planning anyway." "We need to prepare," Sheriff Morton said. "Every able man with a gun should be ready by dawn." As the men organized, Ruby pulled Quinn aside. "This makes no sense. Who would attack Silverhorn's ranch?" Quinn's expression was troubled. "Someone who wants war between Silverhorn and this town, or someone working for Silverhorn himself, giving him the excuse he needed." "You think he'd burn his own property?" Ruby asked, shocked. "A small price to pay for what he wants," Quinn said grimly. "But we can't prove anything. We just have to be ready." Throughout the night, the town prepared. Barricades were erected at key positions, women and children gathered in the sturdiest buildings, and men with rifles took up defensive positions. Quinn moved among them, offering tactical advice based on hard-won experience. Ruby worked alongside other women, preparing bandages and food, moving ammunition to the defenders. Near dawn, she found Quinn checking rifle positions on the eastern approach to town. "You should be inside with the others," he told her. "I'm more useful out here," she replied stubbornly. "I can shoot if needed." Quinn looked like he might argue, then nodded. "Stay low and behind cover." As the first light of dawn broke over the eastern hills, the defenders spotted dust on the horizon. Quinn estimated 40 riders approaching Silverhorn had gathered every hired gun and cowhand he could find on short notice. "Let them come to us," Quinn instructed the nervous townsmen. "Don't fire until they're in range and the sheriff gives the order." The riders slowed as they approached the town's edge, Silverhorn at their head. He raised his hand to halt his men, then urged his horse forward alone. "I want justice for the attack on my property," he shouted. "Hand over Whitaker and those responsible, or we'll take this town apart." Sheriff Morton stepped out from behind a barricade. "Nobody here attacked your ranch, Silverhorn. We were all in town celebrating the court decision." "Convenient alibi," Silverhorn sneered. "My men recognized Whitaker's boy among the raiders." "That's a lie," Samuel called out from his position. "My son was here with us all night." Quinn studied the situation with growing unease. Silverhorn seemed too confident, and his eyes kept scanning the town's defenses, as if looking for something specific. "This doesn't feel right," he murmured to Ruby, who had taken position nearby with her father's rifle. "He's playing for time." As if confirming his suspicion, Quinn noticed movement to the west, a second group of riders circling to attack the town from behind. "It's a trap!" he shouted. "Second group coming from the west." The warning came just as Silverhorn's men charged from the east. Gunfire erupted from both sides as the defenders scrambled to cover the unexpected western approach, Quinn raced to reposition men, his voice cutting through the chaos with clear commands. Ruby found herself alongside 3 townsmen facing the western attackers. She fired her rifle with careful aim, the way her father had taught her years ago. One of Silverhorn's men fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. The battle raged for nearly an hour, with Silverhorn's superior numbers pressing the defenders back toward the center of town. Buildings took fire, windows shattered, and several townsmen lay wounded or worse. Quinn fought with cold precision, his movements economical, his shots finding their marks with deadly accuracy. He didn't shoot to kill unless necessary, instead disabling riders to reduce the attacking force. Ruby lost sight of him as she helped drag a wounded man to safety behind the general store. When she emerged, the street was thick with gun smoke, the sounds of battle unrelenting. Silverhorn himself had dismounted and was advancing with several men toward the town hall, where the Whitaker family had taken refuge with other non-combatants. Ruby moved to intercept them, firing twice to force them into cover. "The fiery-haired shopkeeper's daughter," Silverhorn called out, recognizing her. "Put down the gun, girl. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns everyone in Willow Creek," Ruby replied, her rifle steady despite her pounding heart. "One last chance," Silverhorn warned. "My men are surrounding your position." Before Ruby could respond, Quinn's voice rang out from above. He had positioned himself on the roof of the adjacent building, his rifle trained on Silverhorn. "Call off your men, Silverhorn," Quinn commanded. "You've lost enough of them today." The cattle baron looked up, rage contorting his features. "Hawkins, I should have known you'd be at the center of this." "I'm giving you a way out," Quinn said. "Order your men to withdraw. No one else needs to die today." "You think you can dictate terms to me?" Silverhorn snarled. "I own half this territory." "Not this town," Quinn replied evenly, "and not the people in it." For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, from the direction of the eastern road, came the sound of many riders approaching. All eyes turned to see a column of blue-uniformed cavalry cresting the rise, at least 30 strong. "That'll be the detachment from Fort Laramie," Sheriff Morton called out, emerging from cover with a bloody arm. "Sent a rider last night after we heard about the ranch burning." Silverhorn's face drained of color as he realized his position. The arrival of the cavalry changed everything. Attacks on civilians were one thing, but engaging with the U.S. Army was another entirely. "Stand down," he ordered his remaining men, his voice tight with suppressed fury. As the cavalry entered the town, the shooting gradually ceased. The captain, a stern-faced man named Reynolds, quickly assessed the situation and placed Silverhorn under military arrest, pending investigation of the attack on the town. "This isn't over," Silverhorn hissed, as 2 soldiers escorted him away. "You've made an enemy for life. Hawkins." Quinn watched him go without response, then climbed down from his position to check on the wounded. He found Ruby helping Dr. Fletcher tend to injured townspeople in the makeshift infirmary set up in the saloon. "You're hurt," she said when she saw him, noting the blood seeping through his shirt at the shoulder. "Bullet grazed me," Quinn dismissed. "Others need attention more." Ruby insisted on cleaning and bandaging the wound herself. As she worked, she asked quietly, "What happens now?" Quinn winced slightly as she applied antiseptic. "Silverhorn will face military justice for attacking the town, but his influence runs deep. He might avoid the worst consequences." "And the Whitakers?" "They're safe for now. The cavalry captain said they'll maintain a presence in the area until things settle." Quinn looked at her, his expression serious. "But eventually, they'll leave." Ruby tied off the bandage. "And will you leave too?" Quinn didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "I've stayed in one place too long already. Men like me don't put down roots." "Men like you," Ruby repeated. "You mean men who stand against injustice? Men who risk their lives for others? Perhaps those are exactly the kind of men who should put down roots." "It's not that simple," Quinn said, standing. "Thank you for the bandage." He walked away, leaving Ruby staring after him with a mixture of frustration and understanding. She'd glimpsed enough of his soul to know that Quinn Hawkins carried burdens deeper than she could imagine, and scars that went beyond the physical. In the days that followed, Willow Creek began to rebuild. The cavalry maintained a presence as promised, and Captain Reynolds conducted a thorough investigation into both the attack on Silverhorn's ranch and the subsequent assault on the town. Evidence mounted that Silverhorn had indeed orchestrated the raid on his own property. As a pretext, 2 of his hired guns confessed when faced with hanging for murder. Quinn kept to himself during this time, helping with repairs around town, but avoiding conversation beyond what was necessary. Ruby watched him from a distance, respecting his need for space while hoping he might reconsider his plans to leave. 1 week after the battle, as Quinn was repairing the damaged roof of the Whitakers' town lodgings, Ruby approached with a canteen of water. "Thought you might be thirsty," she called up. Quinn climbed down the ladder and accepted the water gratefully. "Thank you." "Captain Reynolds announced the results of his investigation this morning," Ruby said. "Silverhorn's being transported to Denver to stand trial for conspiracy and murder. His assets have been frozen pending the outcome." Quinn nodded. "Good. Though men with his money have a way of avoiding justice." "Not this time," Ruby insisted. "The evidence is too strong, and the territorial governor is personally involved now that the army reported the full extent of his actions." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Quinn spoke again. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning." Though she'd expected it, the words still hit Ruby like a physical blow. "Where will you go?" "North, maybe. Montana, somewhere new." He couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Why?" Ruby asked directly. "What are you running from now? Silverhorn's finished." "I'm not running," Quinn said, an edge entering his voice. "This is how I live. Moving on is safer for everyone." "Safer for whom? The town that now respects you? The people whose lives you saved?" Ruby stepped closer. "Or is it safer for you? Because staying means facing the possibility of caring about someone again?" Quinn's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Ruby challenged. "I've seen you, Quinn Hawkins. Not the legend or the reputation, but the man. You're afraid, but not of Silverhorn or any outlaw. You're afraid of belonging somewhere, because the last time you belonged, it was taken from you." "Enough," Quinn said sharply. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but my mind is made up." Ruby felt tears threatening, but held them back through sheer force of will. "Then go. Prove me right." She turned and walked away, her back straight and her head high, despite the ache in her heart. Quinn watched her go, a turmoil of emotions he'd long suppressed rising within him. That evening, as Quinn packed his few belongings in his room above the saloon, a knock came at his door. He opened it to find Patrick O'Malley standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. O'Malley," Quinn acknowledged, surprised. "What can I do for you?" "May I come in?" the older man asked. Quinn stepped aside, gesturing to the room's only chair, while he remained standing. Patrick sat heavily, studying Quinn for a long moment before speaking. "I've never been one to meddle in my daughter's affairs," he began. "Ruby has a good head on her shoulders and makes her own decisions. Always has." Quinn remained silent, sensing there was more to come. "When her mother died, I worried Ruby would never allow herself to care deeply for anyone again. Catherine was everything to her." Patrick's weathered hands clasped together. "For 5 years, I've watched my daughter refuse good men because something was missing. She never said what that something was, but I had my suspicions." He looked up at Quinn. "She was waiting for someone who understood loss the way she does, someone who fights for what's right, even when it's easier to walk away. Someone who sees her strength instead of trying to protect her from the world." Quinn shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. O'Malley, I'm not sure what—" "Let me finish," Patrick interrupted gently. "I know you're planning to leave, and maybe that's the right decision for you. But before you go, I thought you should know something. In all the years since her mother passed, I've never seen Ruby look at anyone the way she looks at you." The older man stood with a slight grunt. "That's all I came to say. Whatever you decide, I respect your choice. Ruby will too, eventually. She's resilient that way." After Patrick left, Quinn stood motionless in the center of the room, his carefully constructed walls crumbling against the weight of the old man's words. He'd spent so many years keeping people at a distance, convinced that attachments were weaknesses that would only lead to pain. Yet in Willow Creek, against all his intentions, he'd formed connections. The Whitakers, Sheriff Morton, even some of the townspeople who had once eyed him with suspicion, now nodded respectfully when he passed. And Ruby Bright, fearless Ruby, who saw through his defenses with those clear green eyes. Dawn found Quinn on the ridge overlooking the town, his packed saddlebags beside him, his black stallion grazing nearby. He'd come to watch the sunrise one last time, before riding out. But as the golden light spread across the valley, illuminating the settlement below, his resolve wavered. From this vantage, he could see the town coming alive, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving about their morning routines, rebuilding what had been damaged. To the east, the Whitaker homestead stood intact, despite Silverhorn's best efforts to destroy it, and there, walking along the main street toward her father's store, was a figure with unmistakable red hair, her steps purposeful, even at this early hour. Quinn had told himself 1,000 times that he didn't belong here or anywhere, that his past made a future impossible, that the darkness he carried would eventually touch anyone who came too close. But watching Ruby now, he wondered if perhaps he'd been wrong, if the walls he'd built to protect himself had instead become a prison of his own making. Before he could reconsider, Quinn was mounting his horse and riding down toward town. He found Ruby unlocking the general store, her back to him as he approached. "Ruby," he called softly. She turned, surprise registering on her face as she took in his appearance ready for the trail, his horse loaded for travel. "You're leaving," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I was," Quinn admitted. Had every intention to be miles away by now. "What stopped you?" she asked, not quite allowing herself to hope. Quinn dismounted, closing the distance between them. "You did, or rather, what you said yesterday, about me being afraid of belonging." Ruby waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "You were right," Quinn continued. "I've been running for so long, I forgot what it means to stay, to build something instead of just surviving. And now," Ruby's voice was barely above a whisper, "now, I want to try something different." Quinn took a deep breath. "If there's a place for me here with you, I'd like to stay." Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "There's always been a place for you here, Quinn Hawkins. You just couldn't see it." "I see it now," he said, reaching out tentatively to touch her cheek. "I see you." When their lips met, it felt to Quinn like coming home, a sensation he'd forgotten was possible. Ruby's arms wrapped around him, holding him as if afraid he might still vanish with the morning mist. "People will talk," she murmured against his mouth. The untamable Quinn Hawkins, settling down with the shopkeeper's daughter. Quinn smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Let them talk. I belong to you now." "Yes," Ruby agreed, her eyes shining. "You do." Over the months that followed, Willow Creek watched in fascination as Quinn Hawkins transformed from the dangerous loner they had feared to a respected member of the community. He partnered with Samuel Whitaker, whose injury had left him unable to manage all aspects of his ranch alone, lending his expertise with horses and cattle to help the homestead flourish. Victor Silverhorn was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison. His vast holdings were divided and sold at auction, with many small ranchers, including the Whitakers, able to expand their properties at fair prices. Quinn never completely lost the vigilant edge that years on the run had ingrained in him, but with Ruby at his side, he found the nightmares came less frequently. He spoke more openly about his past, sharing both the darkness and the few bright memories of his family before they were taken from him. On a crisp autumn day, with the aspen leaves turning gold on the mountainsides, Quinn and Ruby were married in the small church in Willow Creek. The entire town attended, along with ranchers from miles around who had come to respect the man who had stood against Silverhorn when few others dared. As they exchanged vows, Quinn held Ruby's hands in his, marveling at how this strong, remarkable woman had seen past his defenses to the man he could become. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, cheers erupted that could be heard all the way to the edge of town. At the celebration afterward, Samuel Whitaker raised his glass in a toast. "To Quinn and Ruby Hawkins," he called out, proof that even the wildest spirits can find peace when they find where they truly belong. Quinn, his arm around his new wife, surveyed the gathering of people who had become more than neighbors. They had become his community, his home. The weight of the past would always be with him. But it no longer defined him entirely. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the small house they now shared, looking up at the stars scattered like diamond dust across the Wyoming sky, Ruby leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. "Happy?" she asked simply. Quinn pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "They called you untamable," Ruby mused, a smile in her voice. "If only they knew." "I was untamable," Quinn corrected her gently. "Until you said I belonged with you." Ruby turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious despite her smile. "You always did, Quinn Hawkins. From the moment you rode into Willow Creek, something in me recognized something in you. We just had to find our way to each other." As their lips met beneath the vast canopy of stars, Quinn knew with absolute certainty that his wandering days were over. The untamable cowboy had finally found his home, not in a place, but in the heart of the woman who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. 5 years later, the Hawkins Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. Quinn and Ruby worked side by side, their partnership extending from love into business as they bred and trained some of the finest horses in Wyoming. Their daughter, Catherine, now 3 years old, with her mother's red hair and her father's storm gray eyes, chased butterflies in the meadow, while Quinn mended a section of fence nearby. Ruby approached with their infant son, James, cradled in her arms. "Rider coming," she called to Quinn, nodding toward the road. Quinn straightened, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun he still wore, though he'd rarely needed to draw it in recent years. As the rider approached, Quinn recognized Sheriff Morton, now sporting more gray in his mustache, but still sitting tall in the saddle. "Afternoon, Hawkins family," Morton called cheerfully as he dismounted. He tipped his hat to Ruby and smiled at Catherine, who had run to hide shyly behind her father's legs. "Sheriff," Quinn nodded, "what brings you out our way?" "Good news, actually," Morton said. "Just got word from the governor's office. Your testimony at the territorial hearings last year helped establish those new regulations protecting small ranchers from land grabs." Quinn nodded. After Silverhorn's fall, he had worked with other ranchers to ensure such abuses of power couldn't happen again. "Glad to hear it. There's more," Morton continued. "The governor's appointed a new territorial judge for this district. They're looking for a marshal to work with him, someone who knows the territory and has the respect of the people." He looked meaningfully at Quinn. "Your name came up." Quinn raised an eyebrow in surprise. "A marshal? Me?" "Can't think of a better man for the job," Morton said sincerely. "You've proven yourself a dozen times over. People trust you." Ruby stepped forward, her free hand finding Quinn's. "It's a great honor," she said, studying her husband's face. "And well-deserved." Quinn looked from the sheriff to his wife, then to his daughter still hiding behind him, and finally to the infant son in Ruby's arms. 5 years ago, he wouldn't have believed this life possible, a family, a home, the respect of the community, and now this offer. "I'll need to think about it," he told the sheriff. "Discuss it with my wife." Morton nodded understandingly. "Of course, no rush on the decision. The judge doesn't arrive for another month." He mounted his horse. "Just wanted you to know you're the first choice." After the sheriff rode away, Ruby shifted baby James to her other arm. "Marshal Hawkins," she said, testing the sound of it. "It has a certain ring to it." "It would mean more time away from the ranch," Quinn said carefully. "More responsibility. And more opportunity to ensure what happened to your family to the Whitakers doesn't happen to others," Ruby pointed out gently. Quinn reached down to pick up Catherine, who giggled as he settled her on his shoulders. "What do you think, Cat? Should your pa be a marshal?" "Will you catch bad men?" the little girl asked seriously. "That would be part of the job," Quinn admitted. Catherine considered this with all the gravity a 3-year-old could muster. "Then yes," she decided. "Bad men should be caught." Quinn and Ruby exchanged smiles over their daughter's simple wisdom. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing that Quinn had built the previous summer. The stars were out in full force, the gentle sounds of night insects creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "If you want to take the position, you should," Ruby said, her head resting on his shoulder. "You'd be excellent at it." Quinn was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders. "There was a time when the law failed me completely," he said finally. "Never thought I'd find myself on the other side of it." "Life takes strange turns," Ruby agreed. 10 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be married to the infamous Quinn Hawkins with two beautiful children, I'd have called them crazy. Quinn chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. Infamous, was I? Absolutely terrifying, Ruby teased. All the young ladies in town were warned to stay far away from you. And yet you didn't listen, Quinn mused. I've never been very good at listening to warnings, Ruby replied with a smile, especially when I saw something worth fighting for. Quinn turned to face her, his expression serious despite his smile. I'm grateful every day that you fought for me, Ruby Hawkins. Even when I wasn't fighting for myself, Ruby traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. You were worth fighting for. You still are. In the quiet darkness of their porch, Quinn made his decision. The untamable cowboy who had once avoided responsibility and connection would take up the marshal's badge, protecting the territory that had become his home and the people who had become his family. As he kissed his wife beneath the Wyoming stars, Quinn reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from a vengeful young man with nothing to lose to a husband, father, and respected member of the community. It wasn't the life he had expected, but it was infinitely better than anything he could have imagined for himself. I love you, he whispered against Ruby's lips. I know, she answered with a smile. You belong with me. Remember? Always have, Quinn agreed, holding her close. Always will. In the years that followed, Marshal Quinn Hawkins became known throughout the territory as a fair but uncompromising lawman. With Ruby managing their ranch and supporting his work, they built a legacy of justice and prosperity that extended far beyond Willow Creek. Their children grew strong and true, raised on stories of courage and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. And though the legend of the untamable cowboy faded into history, it was replaced by something far more meaningful, the story of a man who found his place in the world through the love of a woman who saw not what he was, but what he could become. For Quinn and Ruby Hawkins, that was the greatest adventure of all.